So Liam said that his recording is up and running, so whenever you guys are ready, we can get started.
All right, cool. Well, first of all, welcome everyone. You know, I, uh, before maybe getting into CCO, just a little bit of housekeeping. And you know, we've heard a lot of feedback, from the community, just about better communications, and better transparency. And we thought a lot about this, and figured maybe a solution is just to hold something on a more regular cadence, something that's scheduled so that there's expectations on both sides, both from the core team and the community, and just have a forum like this one, where we can have sort of a more free-flowing conversation. So yeah, I mean, I think starting today, we'll plan to host sort of regularly scheduled bi-weekly town hall with core team and community. So I guess this will be the first one, and we'll sort of get right into it. So CCO, it's a little bit of a hairy and complicated topic. So just to keep it a little bit more organized, I'm going to be talking about it sort of in three topics, I guess. The first is just to give, again, a brief overview of what CCO is. The second would be to talk through our rationale and sort of why we're proponents of CCO. And we try to aggregate, I think, some of the issues or concerns raised from the community. And so we'll try to sort of address that as well. So and obviously, as Bob had mentioned, we'll have ample time to have a more free flowing conversation shortly thereafter. And yeah, and to reiterate again, we are going to be leaving this up to community vote, and we'll talk through some of the logistics there towards the end. So yeah, let's get started. And by the way, core team, just anytime you guys want to just interject and interrupt, feel free to do so. Cool. So what is CCO? I think it was laid out actually really nicely in our announcements. But just to reiterate, it is the most liberal kind of copyright licensing sort of model in existence, right? I think there's a few, it can go under a few different names, CCO, no rights reserved. I think the most common one would be public domain. And, it basically means that the creators of the original work, in this case, the Shonen Junk team, will release any copyright to our Shonen Junk Genesis collection. And so, obviously that implies that it's sort of in the public domain. And, hypothetically, that means that anyone, whether it's, again, core team, whether it's, folks within our community or even outside the community can use the work for any purpose. And so that's sort of, again, the brief overview. And if anyone else, on the team want to chime in, feel free to do so, or I'll just move on to sort of our rationale.
Yeah, I think Nobita did a good job of laying it out. And we've discussed this on a couple of previous community Twitter spaces too. A lot of people were like, well, it sounds like a free-for-all. And ultimately, yeah, essentially that's what it is. It means that there aren't any intellectual property rights reserved by the creators behind the pieces of art or the content. And it means that the work belongs to the public domain, meaning that anyone is free to create the content using that intellectual property. And Nobita is going to expand upon why this was brought up during the last AMA and why the team was basically thinking that this would be a good decision for the project and for community members.
Cool. So, I think the best way to frame, our rationale and again, why we're such big proponents of this, especially for the Shonen Junk collection, might be to just try to frame this conversation around our intentions and less focus. And I'm sure we'll get into it again in sort of the Q&A, but sort of less emphasis on all the possible, potential, infinite hypotheticals, and just talk through our intentions, right? Like, and if you really just boil it down, our simple intention was that we felt that this was additive, right? That it was accretive to the terms of service that we have currently tied to the Shonen Junk collection. And we've had our terms of service there from day one. You can check it out in the light paper. But just to rehash, in case some folks have not seen it, it's a capped up to 100K annual, non-exclusive, meaning you don't have, well, the opposite of non-exclusive would be exclusive, commercial rights license with no derivative rights. So, again, this is probably one of the more sort of restrictive versions of a commercial rights license that exists in the NFT space today. Probably the best maybe analogy here would be, I believe Doodles is roughly in line if you want to go take a peek at their terms of service. And so again, if you're using that sort of as the reference point, we believe that the CC0 model is accretive or it's additive to that. And so I'll talk a little bit about why we think it's additive. And additive sort of in the sense that, well, A, it allows for derivatives in the collection, and B, that it allows for commercialization without a cap, right? So, again, there are different versions, I think, of commercial rights licenses, again, in the NFT space that allow for both of those things to happen. But we really do feel like, the CC0 has sort of an extra, call it plus alpha on top of what, a full commercial rights license, provides or the implications that it has. So again, I think we outlined it, in our announcements, but I'll sort of talk through it as well. The first is that it removes all barriers, right? And so again, if we're thinking about what a CC0 license will enable, it enables for an open ecosystem, right? Where again, anyone that's inspired for one reason or another, they're encouraged, to take initiatives and quite frankly, be rewarded for taking those initiatives as well, right? Not to have a cap on what the rewards that you might reap from taking action, and not having any restrictions or having to look over your shoulders as you're creating sort of on top of Shonen Junk. And so, we have the village, and we have a bunch of creators sort of in the anime industry. And one of the things that we really want to do is to have a prosperous creative hub within sort of, our eventual DAO. And so this was one way that we felt that it helps really encourage and is aligned with that, right? Because I'll sort of get into the next part of this, which is, the removing of barriers really helps dovetail into network effects. I think actually a few folks in the community pointed to a Bankless newsletter. It was actually quite timely, maybe a day or two ago, and I encourage people to read that because I think it talks a lot about the network effects of going CCO. But to sort of give an explanation there, by removing barriers, by allowing people to have the freedom to build on top of Shonen Junk, we believe in the long run will provide brand awareness and exposure, and sort of that's how you get like the flywheel going, right? And again, I think there are examples in the NFT space today. I often point towards MFers and all the sort of derivative projects that have come out of MFers, and how ultimately that has sort of lifted the awareness and exposure for at the MFers collection itself. Right. Sorry, and I'll take a pause there, and then if anyone else on the core team want to chime in, feel free to do so.
I think and basically what Nobita just said, it's all really valid, right? Like these are the core arguments behind CCO, which is what the team was looking towards when they thought that this would be like a good idea to implement, right? And like honestly, the best path to kind of make the Shonen Jump Genesis collection more valuable is like by removing any friction behind the process of creation, right? So like the idea is that you have this CC0 license, but on the other hand, like the blockchain technology like provides some relief because like you still have ownership over your NFT, while leaving the content in the public domain for viewing and like encouraging creation. And I think that was also what the team was considering when going over, why CCO. And I do really believe, like in the Bankless article, in the Zeneca article, and the other resources that we distributed, like this is the model that truly stands for like the Web3 ethos. Because in the other models, like the traditional limited grant of commercial licensing or whatever, like theoretically, like I guess intuitively, you would think that because you're granted commercial rights, you have a direct line to value. But what a lot of people don't really realize is that you're still beholden to the entity, like the person who gave you those rights in the first place. Whereas like a CCO is like complete freedom. Like you don't have to get our permission. You can go off and do whatever you'd like with the content. And we'll talk about like some of the cons and concerns that were raised behind that too. But like the ultimate freedom to be able to create whatever you want with this content, ultimately it all ties back into promoting the brand behind the Shonen Junk Genesis collection. And I also want to reiterate that it only applies to the Genesis collection. Like we've talked about this before, but the ecosystem is going to be larger than that. And Nobita, I'll let you continue, but I think that it's really important to emphasize, like if we're talking about Web3 and Web3 ethos, just because this hasn't necessarily been popular in the space before, doesn't mean that it's antithetical to it, right? Like if anything, I think the values really align. But yeah, I don't want to babble on, so let's keep going forward. And I'm sure more organic conversations will arise once we start chatting with community members.
No, for sure. And like I'll just draft off of kind of what you're talking about. Again, was sort of outlined in the announcements. I think what it's worth, talking through is like we need to push boundaries, right? If we're really going to succeed in fulfilling our vision of reimagining, anime and Web3, like we're gonna need to push boundaries, as a group, as a collective, as a team, community holders, whatever. Like we're all gonna need to be doing it, and on multiple fronts, right? And obviously with varying levels of scale, in terms of the impact. And so, I don't know. I jotted down a couple just to give some, maybe some analogies or some reference points. But the simplest way in which we need to push boundaries, as an example, is, we're going to have our creators, to create in a more open forum, right? And to be willing to receive, inputs from our community. And, like that might not seem maybe like much at face value, but it is, very atypical to a traditional production process, and that's usually closed door, in a dark room somewhere. So like just something like that, on sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, we are going to have to figure out how to sustainably and scalably have decentralized governance, of a media entity. And so all this to say is, we need to continue to push the boundaries. We need to continue to push and innovate. And so this is sort of our example with, our most precious collection, our Genesis collection, in being proponents of CC0. And I will stop there in case anyone else has anything else to say.
I think another point relatedly is like, if we're talking about like the limited commercial grants license, I feel like a lot of people also underestimate how like restrictive in nature that is. Like a lot of people point to like Bored Ape Yacht Club and other projects that, rightfully and legitimately have those license models. But as Nobita said, we believe that, yeah, it's important to push the boundaries, but also like in a practical sense, a CCO promotes more freedom. Like if you are granted limited commercial rights, like how many people would actually do something with those rights, right? Like how many people would be able to produce something that reaches a mass audience, right? And it's hard to do that. Like practically speaking, if you have one individual versus like a network of creatives, like what's going to have the broader outreach, right? And so like the incentive behind the CCO is that you have access to that network. Like people can contribute and expand their creations across it versus like one person who makes a Bored Ape Yacht Club restaurant, and like good for them. But again, like under the whole umbrella of like pushing boundaries, giving back to the community, and being a Web3 model, I like the CCO like just makes more sense. And we recognize that there are concerns and we want to talk through those with you guys. But we just wanted to give insight into how the team basically came to the idea that this would be beneficial to the community. And for transparency purposes, a lot of people during the last AMA, like there was like a lot of hype created around like, oh, there's going to be alpha drop tonight, and then it was like the alpha is CCO mic drop. And like, understandably, a lot of community members were a little bit like taken aback or confused or not really understanding what it meant for the collection or what it meant for holders. And, the intention, like for transparency purposes, it was meant to be definitive. But as Nobita was saying earlier, it wasn't meant to like detract from the value of the collection or for holders. Like the team honestly didn't really consider it to be like a liability in any sense. It was just thought as something that would attribute value to the project and collection. And as we said earlier, like the stance at the end of the day is that this is our project and our collection, so if the people feel strongly like that we shouldn't do this, then yeah, we'll put it to a vote and the community will make a choice. But the lesson learned from the last AMA was to be more communicative about what the team is thinking, and involve the community more throughout those discussions. And so we're hoping, we put forward the proposal for the CCO and we'll have an official proposal written up. More details will be announced later on this stage, I believe. But I just wanted to say that's where the biweekly town halls come in. And that's why we're here, giving like a proposal on the team's behalf, and also walking through these concerns with everyone in the community.
Awesome. Thanks, Sabrina. So yeah, I mean, I think just to try to keep this short, so I'm not just babbling on and on. The last sort of, I think, topic was to try to aggregate and sort of distill a lot of the concerns that were raised, post, I guess, the last Twitter Spaces. And so I sort of bucketed into maybe 3 or 4 things. The first was, and by the way, just to caveat, these are just generally tough to address head on, because we're talking about mostly hypotheticals, but obviously we're here to give our perspective on that. So the first one was, I think there was many questions posed about like how does this benefit individual holders, and hopefully some of the things that we mentioned up top, especially about network effects, helps sort of address that, and sort of the longer way to put it is, we really do believe that what the potential for a CCO can unlock for the collection in its entirety in the long term, outweighs the potential for an individual holder, let's say under a commercial rights license, to reach licensing agreements for their individual NFTs, and sort of profit off of that. And so, like, I guess the broader theme or the statement here is, really it's just rising tide lifts all boats. And this is a little bit more of a passive way for you to be able to benefit, as a holder, right? Like I think many people, actually most of us on this call from core staff, I think we have probably looked at, more licensing agreements than we'd like to admit, just given, our backgrounds at Crunchyroll. And so we know how taxing all of that is. And so we felt like the collective benefit under CCO would outweigh, having some sort of exclusivity for individual NFTs. And before I move on to the next one, is there anything else that any other core staff members want to add? I think, not to put you on the spot, but I think, Kun, you had a really good point around this, even when we were talking about it yesterday.
Oh, did I?
So.
Okay. Well, I mean, I can just summarize how I'm thinking about it, which, I mean, I think kudos to Nobita and S234. I think you guys have done an amazing job just laying out the pros of what CCO is and why we should care and why it's good for this project. But for me, how I think about it is, one, clearly I think this is the best thing for this project, and I'm definitely going to vote with my junkies for it. I think CCO gives permission back to the community, and in a way that no other license does. And if you look at all the projects that don't have a CCO or equivalent, you're kind of left thinking as the community, well, what is held back? Like what can't I do? And you just don't know. Well, in the CCO model, none of it's held back. All of it is given to the community, and I just think that's really powerful, and aligns very well with Web3. And it's not even just the community today; it's all the community that's going to come in the future as well. And if other projects spring up from this because of what we're doing to enable a CCO for our project, and they're inspired and they want to build on top of our project or alongside it, I think that's just an amazing outcome. And I think, you know, I would love to have more of that. And I think maybe some people might be concerned that, well, other projects might be benefiting because of that. I can tell you when, you know, I saw Loot when it first came out, and the fact that they released that with CC0, so many of the projects with Loot were building on top of Loot, and they were actually giving utility to the existing Loot Genesis holders because that was the community that the form that they wanted to build on top of and to reward, right? So I think it's very much additive, and practically speaking, if your collection is not really worth anything, then wouldn't you want to have everyone to meme it and to remix it and to popularize it and to do all sorts of things with it, to market it and to make it well known? And if it's worth a lot, then, you know, you've kind of already won because you still own the NFT. And by the way, you still can commercialize it if you want it. And yes, others could as well, but again, you still have the official NFT. You can say you're the official vendor for, you know, the T-shirt, and I think that still means a lot, right? Like anyone can sell a replica print of the Mona Lisa, but there's, you know, only one official Mona Lisa at the museum, and, you know, there's only, you know, official vendor for selling Mona Lisa T-shirts at the museum. So anyway, that's just, you know, how I've, you know, roughly thought about this.
Awesome. Actually, why don't I just get to maybe the next? But actually, this is somewhat related to your last statement, which you know, I think someone had pointed out, like, you know, can't, you know, someone just make a copy, you know, of my NFT? And you know, I think in theory, yes, but just going back to what Kun was alluding to, with what's really interesting about, or extremely powerful, quite frankly, about Web3 is the provenance, right? That is guaranteed by this trustless ledger. I guess if you're using the Mona Lisa sort of analogy, it's whatever the proof of authenticity is, like that's there today. And so anything that sort of stems from this or sprouts from this, you can always sort of say, I have the original NFT that this derivative work was based off of, or this copy was based off of. And so we think that notion of sort of, I guess, property rights is really powerful. Alrighty then. Maybe we can spend some time too, actually talking about the cons, just because I think it's worthwhile to sort of talk through it, specifically the cons of CC0, right? And I think the first point, that is valid, but that there's this notion that some sort of exclusivity or restrictions on an IP just makes it more valuable. And, you know, sort of our counter argument to that, if there is one, because in theory that is true, but that all depends on really enforcement. And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I haven't seen much enforcement in the space, and, you know, people do it anyways. And so while in theory that's true, I think in practice, I've really yet to see any real world examples, especially in the NFT space, wherein you see enforcement around that. So that's the first sort of con. And then, you know, not to be like facetious, but the second con is like bad actors, and, you know, there's plenty of bad actors in the space today. So I don't know that, like, you know, doing a CC0 versus not will encourage or discourage bad actors, especially in the space today. Any thoughts there from staff?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you mentioned is definitely, well, everything you mentioned is true, but one of the things that I picked up on is the blockchain does add, like it verifies your NFT ownership, right? And also the amount of bad actors versus, again, this is like under hypotheticals, but like hypothetically speaking, you'd assume that there would be more good actors contributing to like positive representation of the content under this license over, a bad actor in the space. And also like under the traditional, or not traditional, I mean, like the alternative, like commercial license, I mean, you have bad actors there too. But the problem with that is if you're granted these commercial rights and somebody's, illegally profiting off of your work, then like you as the holder of these rights then also have to pay money yourself to like defend for those rights and basically like go through the whole copyright infringement process. And a lot of people, like the legal system is not intuitive for a lot of people. It's actually really hard to navigate, and there's a lot of gray area too. And so by having it open to the public domain, you're also like avoiding all of these administrative and like legal gray area headache areas. And so I think that's important to note too. But yeah, I guess that's what I wanted to say about that. I'm also like trying to read the chat at the same time. So I love all the engagement. And yeah, okay, this is good.
All right. And I think the last thing was to talk through what about some potential other sort of licensing models. I think CCBY was one that was brought up. I think there can also be an argument to be made about maybe its full commercial rights license, which would, in our eyes, be kind of one step down from that. And so, not sure what the best approach this is. Maybe it's I think there are folks within in the community that feel pretty strongly about one or the other. And so maybe, I don't know, Sabrina or Bob, like, should we bring folks up to talk about it, or
Yeah, for
at
sure.
a later stage?
Yeah,
Okay.
I see
Maybe at
Black
the end.
Coffee's hand is up. So yeah, we'll get
Okay,
to
cool.
we'll bring him up towards the end.
Perfect. Yeah. And I think the reason why I'm bringing it up or this way is, we're going to be, again, putting this up to a vote with the community. So getting a better sense of where, folks' heads are at, I think would be really helpful for that. And I mean, that's kind of all I have on my side. But if, there are people on the core team that want to chime in with maybe their thoughts or their opinions on this, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, what gets me most excited about CCO is just the immense amount of talent already we have in our community. We have artists, we have writers, we have musicians, illustrators, animators, really just an incredible pool of talent in the Web3 space. So, with the CCO with free reign to allow our community to collaborate with no restrictions on what you guys can create, I think that definitely gets me the most excited for the future.
All right. Well, Uncle Niku, Squid, anybody want to throw in their 2 cents before we move along to some community questions?
Yeah, I think Nobita did an excellent job of covering like everything. Um, the only thing that I'm not sure if it was touched on, but it might be worth, I mean, but it might be worth just mentioning, is that CCO doesn't prevent you or really anybody from making unique derivatives and then protecting those derivatives yourself. So again, you create a manga based on your junkie, you can copyright that manga and protect it just like you would any other original work. So there's nothing there. I mean, nobody actually asked that question, but just want to make sure that was clear.
Awesome. Thank you, Uncle Niku. Um, cool. So are we good to move on to community questions? Start bringing some people up here. Speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, let's do it. I have been in the chat. I haven't been watching as to who's been requesting to speak. Boppin, do you know who was first? Who should we bring up here?
Yeah, Black Coffee had his hand up. I also invited Deskio up. So, what's up,
Beautiful.
Black Coffee? How you doing?
Hey, pretty good. I'm actually on my AirPods, so can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So, I actually have a couple questions. I'll do two or three, then I'll let someone else come up here. But I kind of got into this late. I had some in real life stuff going on, so I got in about 20 minutes ago. So you may have already like broached this topic at the beginning. So one of my first questions is how far into the project or how late into the mint was CCO first discussed? And the reason I asked that is it was brought up in the AMA about a week or so post mint, so pretty fresh after mint. And during the whole mint cycle, we pushed everyone to the light paper. We said, hey, read the light paper. It's what the project's about. Everything you need to know about the project is in the light paper, and that's what we're building off of. On the very last page of the light paper, there's a terms of service or terms of use. I don't know the exact, I don't have it in front of me. There is a very specific language of what we were buying and how you could use the NFT in terms of property rights, like very specific. It lines out, you can have $100,000 in monetary. You got a limited commercial license. Again, it's not in front of me, but you can go read it. It's in there. So we push that hey, this is what we're selling to you through mint. And then right after mint, it's oh hey, we're looking at this CCO thing now, which is a completely non-attribution license. Anyone in the world can use your media, take it for their own, and do their thing. So my question is, if you knew fairly well into the mint that you were going to propose this, why was that never updated to reflect people buying an asset? Because in my eyes and a lot of other people's eyes that read that, you were buying into a project that had your limited commercial license. And then once it was minted out, it's, oh, hey, we're going to change this now. So I kind
Hello?
of
Yeah,
would like
yeah.
like
So
some insight on that.
no, for sure. I mean, I think I can try to address that. The first part is it might have missed I think I heard you came in a little late, but like our intention was not. I think the phrase bait and switch I've heard. And so, if anything, this is like our bad in terms of the communications of it and the sort of like way in which we went about communicating this. So I think that's number one. Number two is, we felt that we never really considered this to be anything more than additive. And so, we weren't ever kind of thinking about this as like oh, hey, this is what we sold them, this is what they're getting, and it's worse. In fact, we thought it was going to be pretty unanimous that it would be looked upon as better. In terms of like where in the process did we consider CCO, quite frankly, we had always sort of looked at the show. I mean, it should be pretty clear in the art itself, but we had always considered it to be extensible. Now, not legally extensible, but artistically extensible. Meaning, there's plenty of, I guess, call them maybe commons. I'm not sure, but like there's a whole subset of the Genesis collection that's fairly unadorned, and that was intentional, right? With the idea that like if it's, I guess, plain enough, I'm not sure what the right language is here, but if it's not so distinct, there's a lot of things that you can do with it. And so I think the spirit of it has always been there from the beginning. The legal came later.
Yeah, and the only other thing I wanted to add is I agree that the fundamental issue, like the big issue, was that the lack of communication, right? And actually, like the problem was that a lot of the communication was like happening in the back channels. So yeah, these terms were in that version of the light paper, and as the team said, like they were just trying to follow the trend in the space, based on the version that other projects had. But like the more they looked at it, the more that the CCO model made sense. And part of that, again, like tracing back to the communication issues, was that the team was getting feedback from community members saying that those rights actually felt too restrictive, and to look at some other projects in the space that had some other licenses that weren't as restrictive as the one that was originally in the light paper. So again, the communication was happening more in the back channels, but like obviously that was a mistake, and that's why we're going to have these biweekly town halls to talk through these issues together moving forward.
But yeah, just to summarize, Black Coffee, like the way in which we went about it and the way in which we communicated, that is our bad. And so we will, sort of rectify that moving forward. But the spirit of it, hopefully, it's come across to you. The spirit and the intention behind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then, so I'm gonna go into my second question. So, the Shonen Junk, and as you just kind of like supported this statement, it's basically based off generic anime that isn't really ambiguous, and it could be from anyone or anything or anyone, correct? I mean, just in the anime realm. Would you agree with that? So by looking at that art, it comes from a bunch of different aspects of anime world, right?
Yes and no. I feel like we have to be careful with language here because of like different legal arguments. And again, like, we all went through the DMCA together, right? Where the team did go back and out of precaution changed some of the details in the artwork. But like when you're talking about like legal arguments of like public use, like an homage to something, like an homage to anime art, that was like basically the original vision behind this collection, right? I guess you could say that that was based off of like generic anime. It's just I kind of want to make it clear, and I don't even like want to say this, but like I just want to make it clear that like it wasn't an intention to like copycat, right? It's like there's a line there, but like yeah, sorry.
Okay, so but the what you phrased up is exactly what I'm getting at. It's generic anime art. So by not attributing to the Shonen Junk brand, right? It doesn't matter if what someone takes of our artwork. If you went out there and just threw my profile pic on a billboard in LA right now, and everyone, a million people a day drove by it with no attribution, said, "Hey, that's badass. I like that." They're not going to know who it is or what it is, and they won't even know who to go look for because it's such a generic form of the art that there's nothing that makes it stand out. So when everyone's talking about this, oh well, the Mona Lisa is this, and you can copy this, and just they have the proof of provenance, so they know what it is. The problem with that and no attribution is no one can. There's nothing that sets Shonen Junk apart from everything else. So yeah, if someone takes my profile pic and say they make a magazine cover with it and it blows up around the world, no one's gonna know that that's a Shonen Junk PFP with red hair because there is nothing that sets that apart from other animes or other art. It's an anime picture, right? So how would anyone out in the world that's not in this small community ever know to go back to my profile picture to know that I own the original if it's not that well known to know? And that's why I brought up the CCBY is because it's not like Coca-Cola that already has a brand established. It's not like the Mona Lisa that already has a legacy established. You have a brand new project with literally no ground, no bed, no base, nothing we're building right now, right? So you don't have that vision out in the world that everyone just knows. If you see a Salvador Dali, you know that that's a Salvador Dali. Like if you see a Picasso, you know that's a Picasso. If you see a can of Coca-Cola, you know that's a can of Coca-Cola. You don't have to attribute to that because they've already built their legacy, they built their brand, and they built their IP. If you just let this go and you don't have attribution, nobody will know that that art came from this because 90% of the world doesn't watch anime. And an even smaller percent is in NFTs. So nobody will know that that came from this project.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And I think that like CCO, like this is like hypothetical, but like CCO is basically like give and take, right? Like how you get that brand recognition. Like the purpose behind the CCO license is to get the content out there so that it ties back to the original collection. And when you're
Yeah, but
talking
the
about like
thing is, without that
the
attribution,
artwork,
nothing ever
right, right,
ties
right,
it
right,
back. And,
right,
and, and,
right.
and we,
And
we just established
attribution
it's a
and
generic
oh,
art.
please don't.
So
Okay,
if you
please.
have a generic art that's not tied back, how do you ever get that attention? I mean, take a generic pill that's never tied back to Tylenol, you never get that attribution. I mean, that's what I'm trying to convey is that we can plaster it
Is,
everywhere. And if nothing
isn't,
comes back to
isn't this,
Shonen Junk,
isn't
then
your,
what good does it do?
isn't your ownership on the blockchain that you own your NFT? That's immutable. Everyone who can inspect blockchain will see that, right? And I get the aspiration to want to attribute every single thing that we do to us individually or as a project, but I have to believe that as our project becomes more popular and great if people use our project art and put on a billboard, I think that's just going to draw more attention to us broadly, right? And when people see that, oh, this collection exists on the blockchain, they can go to OpenSea and they can see, oh wow, there's like 9,001 of these things. They will know, and like we live immutably on the blockchain through the ownership, right? And just from a practical perspective with attribution, I think it sounds nice in spirit, but like in practice, I don't even know how you would do that or even enforce that. Like what do you actually put? Do you put our smart contract address? Do you put like a URL? Do you put like a name, and like I don't even know how that would work in practice. So I get the spirit. I appreciate the spirit. I think the implementation actually would be more difficult than in practice.
Hey guys, if I may, Black Coffee, I think, where Black Coffee is coming from is he's going, hey, we don't have a product out to market yet in which people would recognize it. But, that's just because we're seeing, as only as far as our headlights can allow us. I mean, no, by the time this goes up on billboards, there will be, we're going to be building out content. So it's sort of a chicken and an egg thing. But I mean, I can totally see the vision of where the team's coming from on this.
But that and just to tack on to that, like I think actually you said it best. It's chicken or the egg. And actually, I see merits on both sides. What Kuhn just outlined, as well as some of the concerns that Black Coffee raised. I think at the end of the day, we believe by allowing people to freely create on and build on top of Shonen Junk, will help the cause such that again, we're not even just and by the way, like I think Kuhn said it maybe earlier on in the AMA, like we're talking about like the next month or 2 or 3, like when we're talking about folks outside of like the existing NFT space today, and we're talking 2 to 3 years out from now, and you have again the Shonen Junk collection and derivatives freely built on top of that. I think the attribute, just the billboard example that you gave, will be much easier, I think, and better able to attribute back to a Shonen Junk.
Do keep in mind that we are voting on this, so NFT holders will be able to vote, and this will be on Snapshot soon, and we'll link to it. So it's up to the community. We don't know what people want, so you guys let us know by voting.
Yeah, and hey guys. Sorry, wanted to chime in one more thing. I do think there's a separate issue there, Black Coffee, which you're kind of mentioning, which is the marketing aspect. This doesn't alleviate the burden on us, the community, and the project and the team to go and market Shonen Jump. Like we still need to do that, and so we still need to get much better at that. I think as a community, as a team, because to your point, you're right. Like if someone does make our project popular, and we don't really say anything about our project, and no one knows about our project, then yeah, that's kind of our bad also, right? But I think that would be the case regardless. And just on the attribution point, like I don't know, I did 12, 13 years of anime attribution, and that was a huge pain. Like every piece of art that you see with anime, you will see an attribution line, and every piece of attribution had to be very exact. If you get 1 comma, 1 period, 1 space, if you get the capitalization wrong, they send it back. And to the point where our creative teams at Crunchy, we were like, you know what, we're not going to put more marketing collateral out there. We're just not going to market this thing, because every time we have to go get approval for attribution, and it had to be done a certain way, and it was a huge friction on actually marketing the anime that we even licensed.
Yeah, and anime wouldn't be a thing that it is today if 2 guys on the team here didn't bootleg a bunch of it and put it out in the world. So I think we know how that story goes.
Hey guys, if I could chime in, I think it's an interesting concern that you bring, Black Coffee. The way I look at it is, I guess, kind of along the lines of what CZ was talking about with chicken or the egg. Like, I'm not concerned about somebody using IP that I, would like to have rights to, for something like a billboard, right? Like, what is the revenue there? Like, it seems, I would argue that it's like inconsequential. And to S234's point about the legal costs and just the headache of trying to enforce that, if I actually did own IP and somebody, threw it up on a billboard, it wouldn't be worth my time. And on the other edge of the spectrum, like if a big multinational corporation starts using my PFP, I find it hard to believe that they wouldn't at least want to talk to me about that, because of just the potential. Even the potential for litigation is a huge barrier to a well-established company. So it's like on the small end, like I don't really care because it's just not worth my time. And on the big end, like I'm honestly not that concerned about it, because it's a big risk to use any kind of IP. Even when it's, even with the license there, you still want to, like if there's a CCO or like in software, if it's open source, you still want to try and reach out to the people who created the code or created the IP to ensure that, like, ideally get some sort of consent from them. So yeah, I don't know. I understand definitely what you're saying, especially being that it was kind of a surprise to everybody. But me personally, after hearing the team talk about it, and especially like in reference to the MFers, I mean, if you pay attention to what's going on there, like that is one of the most fascinating projects in the space. I unfortunately don't own any, but I know some people who are in that project, and they're very serious people. So there's a lot of value, I think, in CCO. And I have to admit, like I didn't expect this either, but when I heard about it, I didn't even think it was like going to be a negative thing at all. It's kind of with the team there. I just assumed like people would embrace it. I do understand the reservations around it, but ultimately, I think, I mean, I'll be voting for it. I don't want to influence anybody, but just candidly, like I'm in favor of it, and I think that it brings a lot of excitement to the possibilities of this collection.
So my last statement, and then I'll be done, so I don't take any more time. My I guess real estate and commercial development is some of what I do for a secondary income stream, right? So whenever that came up, I know a lot of people don't read the white paper. Most people don't read anything that they buy. They just click buy, and then whatever happens happens. But I'm one of the few that actually reads this stuff. So what I equated it to is if I was buying a piece of land in a real estate contract that had covenants to where you could only build, say, a 5,000 square foot stick built house that had to be brick veneer, right? And you had to have a cedar shake roof to match everything around. So, and then after you closed on your property, you knew the covenants. The city comes back and goes, "Oh, we're going to make that a public park now that anybody can use." That's kind of how I felt whenever this happened. So I bought an asset because at the end of the day, it is an asset. So I bought an asset that had a pretty defined scope of what I was purchasing. And then after I purchased it, it changed. And that's where I really get it bothers me. It really does bother me. And I know I'm not the only one, because several people have said the same thing, but they won't get up on stage to say it.
Well, we're also holding a vote on it, so it hasn't changed out from underneath you yet. But I think that was the communication failure too. And more so they're rectifying that by having this space and letting us kind of process through it and talk with them. So that's the good news. Is that there's going to be a change in decorum that way. But as far as as far as it changing, we're all going to have a say in the matter. Do you not see the benefits yet from like all the conversation that we've had thus far?
I see pros and cons of both sides. Am I sold on a full O? No. Would I vote for a BY? Yes. I mean, I'm not a master at intellectual property. I do have some master's degrees, so I have gone through some ethics classes, and I have written a thesis, so I know about CCO and how it works. So I know an extent to how some of this stuff works. So that's what I'm basing my experience off of.
Yeah, I definitely just would defer to Kuhn's experience in the anime industry specifically, in which they didn't want to like bring things to market because of issues with marketing. leverage. So that I think that's a probably the most solid point we're going to be able to hear in a speculative argument. And I want to be careful not to fall into these like intellectual traps of like making hypotheticals endlessly, because it just stifles our own growth. But I totally understand your maybe misgivings.
Yeah, no, that's what I said. That's all I had to say. I mean, I said my piece, and we'll vote and go from there.
Black coffee, another thing that's kind of interesting about your analogy, and I agree with ZZ, analogies only get us so far, but analogous to the covenants, in property, those can be put to vote to change as well. So that's actually quite akin to what we're doing right now.
Yeah, yes and no. I've dealt with some pretty rough litigation with changing zones in the ordinance, so a vote doesn't always work on that.
May I chime in here? Thanks for allowing me to come up to speak. Hi, everyone. I posted something in the chat about a photographer that I heard this morning, and I think this is something maybe Black Coffee and others who are still on the fence, it may help them think about the potentials. So Michael Yamashita is a National Geographic photographer. He was in a Spaces that I heard a recording of earlier today. And there are a bunch of other photographers in there as well, like professional photographers, and they were stating that because of Instagram and digital photography and the proliferation of images on the internet, they had no way of sort of copywriting their images, and it was just sort of a free-for-all. And because of the blockchain, that has allowed that to be changed and have something immutable and back to direct ownership. And I think if you're championing the blockchain, and if that's what you believe in, and the future of what people are trying to build in this so-called Web3 space, I think then you would be seeing the greater potentials of the CCO. I think that's where most things probably will be headed, because the whole sort of ideology or philosophy of the blockchain is that, right, there can only be one, and it's immutable, and regardless of how many things are out there, you still have direct ownership of that one original thing. And for what it's worth for me, if these professional photographers in this industry, and so Michael Yamashita is now over in Venice. I don't know if it's a Biennale of photography or of such, but it's like an NFT photography conference, and that's what they're talking about there specifically. And I just found reassurance with that as well, like coming from these people that have, I mean, he's 74 years old. He's been doing this all his life, and this is what, he's finally found something in the blockchain that people who own images, his images, can not be concerned that there may be thousands of others out there that people have copies of, because they know they have the image that is traced back to a provenance hash. And if you believe in provenance and the blockchain, then I think you can really see that, the CCO is the way things will be headed. I'm also a little bit, like everybody else in terms of how things may have been stated on the light paper and then changed. But again, I think there was something that Nobita said earlier, perhaps before you were in here as well, on that, about the rights and legalities as well, somewhere in there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there may have been something to do with subject to change or something like that. But yeah, I honestly think, considering the photography side, I think that professional photographers may be the ones to benefit the most in this space, beyond JPEGs and things like that.
Even moving beyond, other examples, it's really a conversation about Web 2 versus Web 3, right? And the ethos of decentralization, because that ownership is. I think we're moving to a different ecosystem entirely. That's sort of maybe a conversation we can have as a community in more community spaces, talking about like Web3 and what to expect in that regard. Yeah, I would say that more stringent license or even attribution, to me, reminds me of yesteryear. And again, this is just the Genesis collection. I know we keep saying that, but it's just this core Genesis collection that has this. I imagine we're going to do something different as we produce IP.
So just playing devil's advocate, then I promise I'll stop. If you're gonna do your Genesis collection and make it a CCO, then why wouldn't, if you're using that argument to make your Genesis that open, then why wouldn't every project you do from now on be a CCO and open to everybody? Because if your argument to change something that's not currently to a CCO, then you would think that mindset would follow through everything. So then everything from here on out would be CCO. If it's that good as everyone says, then you would have no reason to ever go back to a traditional copyright and IP license.
Well, personally, I see the art as kind of like building blocks, free set of building blocks for anyone who wants to use them. That's like the point of your calling the art sort of generic or kind of blank slate, is that so many people can utilize it. So it's a toolbox, in as much as it is a token. But at the end of the day, it is the token that you hold that's most important.
Alrighty, well I'm done, so y'all can drop me down.
Bills, I see you saying in the chat that was a good question and we have a good answer.
Yeah, I just didn't want to be the one to answer it because I'm not sure how much I could say regarding future collections. So maybe Nobita or somebody else could take it.
On black coffees
Yeah.
question. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think again, if we're just talking intention versus like whatever's practical from a legal standpoint, like at the end of the day, we want to give the keys. I mean, it's weird to say keys to the kingdom, but whatever the right analogy is, to creators and to artists. And so for the Genesis collection, we have sort of control over we as a community, right? Like, but the core team have control over this. I think moving forward, the artists will have the driver's seat, and obviously, if they ask our opinions, we'll give sort of what we believe to be. But at the end of the day, that call is going to be based on whatever the artists are and then creators are going to feel most comfortable with. So. And by the way, I think maybe Uncle Niku or somebody alluded to this too, is any sort of derivative works built on top of Shonen Junk will be the same thing. Sorry, did that help answer the question?
Yeah, I think the question was specifically about like whether or not CCO would be used in future collections.
Right. It'll be dependent on the artists and the creators.
Sweet.
Then just as a business person, you're not your business model isn't pointed in one I guess path, if you say that. Like in mine, I have a mission, vision, values in my business. Every decision I make goes back to that mission, vision, values. And you have to stay consistent. So once you start jumping around, like if you make, oh, well, this project's going to be CCO, but we think this one's going to be more valuable. So all of a sudden we want the IP rights to that one because an artist wanted. So that's where I start having like issues with all of this changing stuff around. Because like I said, if we're pushing this strong of a case to make the Genesis a CCO, but then if the artists come up with something else that they think is more valuable or they want attribution to, all of a sudden, now we're going to switch gears and change roads. Like that's kind of shady.
I think it's like meant to be a window, right? Like if we want to preserve the value of the ecosystem, it's not like the brands you mentioned earlier, like Coca-Cola or whatever, operate under CCOs, because at the end of the day, IP is and can be valuable. But I think the intention was that this gives a window to the community and to people outside of the community to participate in this project.
So then that statement just contradicts what you just said about IP rights and it being a legal nightmare. So now we're going to
Well,
take the
okay,
argument of being a legal nightmare, and when it applies to what you want as the core team, all of a sudden
it's
it's
a
okay to have
legal
that legal nightmare.
nightmare. It's a legal nightmare if it's left to one individual to deal with the plethora of legal issues that come along with like defending your IP rights, right? Later in other collections, I don't want to say too much because again, the team is working on all of this stuff, but like in later collections, the idea is that it wouldn't just be like one individual, it's more of like this network kind of system, but I'll leave the team to expand on that because I don't want to give away anything that they're currently working on.
I mean, that's fine, but you get where I'm coming from now, that we're going to start flip-flopping based on what we see as valuable through the project. Like we're not sticking to one path and making that our path.
Right, because
They're
each
not.
project will be different from one another. And that's where I'm struggling to answer your question because we haven't really released anything on future collections. Um, but each one will be different and will have a different purpose.
I also think something that ZZ said is pertinent to this way of sort of thinking through it, is that this is a very new space and a lot of things will change. And as they change, I think projects and things will change as they go along as well. And I think you have to be really fluid with that and not try to compare them back to things outside of this space and how they function and work. So, I mean, you said it's kind of shady to do certain things, but I think the definition of that term may become redundant in the future of the way things work regarding this space and sort of blockchain technology and things as well, because it'll just be ways of adapting to something very new and trying to think through problems and ways of, you know, working the best as we can in this particular new space. And I think that's exactly what is sort of happening, just through, you know, conversations I'm hearing here, and was speaking to Nobby myself about how tokens and DAOs and things will work as well. Everybody's watching what's going on and trying to figure out what is the best way to do things. And I think in the chat as well, Snacken mentioned that Women of the World changed months after their mint about their licensing, and that's a really successful project. And I'm not involved in that at all, but I just wanted to mention that as well, because I don't know if you're seeing the chats in there. In that, I couldn't find the chat either. There's an AMA chat, Black Coffee, which is just above the community hall there. It took me forever to find that chat, but there's some good questions and answers going on in there as well, if you want to have a look in there.
I think Black Coffee's got a good point. I wouldn't call it shady necessarily, but I think in terms of like, it's a lot easier if you can come out with a statement that says this is the why, and that's going to be consistent. But I don't think that necessarily has to be consistent in the sense of everything's got to be CC0 or everything's got to be IP. It's just got to be, you know, this is the rationale. This is what we're working to, and we can always sense check that. I feel like I've missed a lot of stuff, so I'm wary of dropping in because it is like 5 a.m. here.
Yeah, you're
Good
good,
morning,
Mr.
Mr.
Yellow.
Yellow.
Good morning. Thanks for being
Good
with us.
morning. Yeah,
Yeah,
good
I
morning.
just wanna kind of bring it in real quick, just because so Liam is recording this, so this will be, you know, played back for anyone to hear later on. So I just want to be cognizant of the time that we're reaching here with this recording. So yeah, I'll hand it off to Nobita to kind of ring us in here. And
Do you think you need to wrap it up soon, Bobbin?
I just want to be cognizant of the time here, because I know it's late for a lot of the people as well. We can have future conversations as well. But yeah, I just want to kind of ring in the conversation. So Nobita, feel free to chime in.
Yeah. So, well, maybe we can talk through. Well, would love to have a little bit more time, with community members if they have additional questions or concerns. This is the forum to do so. I don't know about everyone else's time. So, I mean, obviously trying to be mindful there, but I mean, I can go for a little bit longer if that's helpful. And then, well, prior to maybe Shinji, you can kind of talk through logistics in terms of like how we're thinking about the voting to work.
Sure. So we did set up a snapshot that we'll share the link. If you guys don't know Snapshot, it's the voting system that most people use. Snapshot.org, I believe. So we set up a space and it'll be our very first vote. So that's kind of exciting. So I think S234 or someone will draft up the text of that proposal and put it out there. The current thought is the vote will have two options. One is CCO and the other is status quo. We did play around and think about like, should we just have three options such as CCBY and all that? It's still not settled, but I think two made some sense because it was simpler and then you won't have like pluralities and so on. And so if you're an opponent of CCO, then you can vote for status quo. And perhaps in a future vote, we can change that as well to like, if you really like CCBY or something like that. Yeah, I think that about covers it for that. Anything else? I don't think so. But again, this was a great discussion. I think both sides make great points, and since we are in this together, we did decide to make it a vote instead of just like us saying this is what it is. And I think that's a great option, and it's best decision. And we'll likely use this voting mechanism for future critical decisions as well. So there you go. That's additional utility for these NFTs.
Shinji, I was just worrying. The only thing that worries me about a vote is what happens if we get like 100 or 200 people voting. That just doesn't feel like we've reached out enough. And I don't have any opposition to the vote, but I just worry about getting enough people being in the Discord and in the community to understand this is really something you need to interact with and you really need to use your vote.
Yeah, definitely. Voter turnout is a concern for any sort of democracy, I guess. So it's our job, all of us, to kind of get the word out, and encourage everyone to vote on this.
Yeah, that kind of leads into a good question, I think, Shinji, is do we know when this vote will take place?
That's a good question. It's really, I was thinking we would put it out there either tonight or like tomorrow. It's ready to go. We just need to figure out the copy of the text a little bit more, and then I don't know about deadline. I think typical is something like a week, but we're all ears. We're open to suggestions here.
Hey Shinji, maybe a little bit of a kind of off-topic question. We were talking about DAO details being finalized. I think it was either this week or next. Is there anything to be said on that today, or do you want to wait till next week?
Sorry, what? Dovetails?
The DAO details.
DAO details. DAO details. I think I'll defer that to Nobita and he's been working on it most.
Yeah. So and maybe there was a little bit of like a, again, miscommunication. So just to be crystal clear, when we are referring to the DAO details, it's the DAO framework. We're actually going through, we're in the process of getting all the legal part of it down. So like the actual like not manifestation, but like the actual implementation of the DAO, we're still, you know, far away. I think what we can and will need to share is what is the framework in which we're going to be operating. And that is something that we will share. I thought it would be actually a good topic to discuss in maybe the next town hall. Well, we can figure out the exact date because I think it's actually Golden Week here in Japan in 2 weeks. But we'll figure out a time. I think. But the idea would be the next town hall will actually go through. I think together the DAO framework and talk through that a little bit with the community and have a forum for that discussion.
Cool. Thank you.
Of course.
I got a future gazing kind of question because I've just never been in a project that's done this. But would there be some additional value you could give by maybe making stuff available to the community to work with that? I don't know how this CCO works. Like, do you just dump the 10,000 files out there and go, or 9,001, and sort of go, there you go grab it? Or would it be, I don't know whether it's possible to get more detailed stuff as a community member and maybe be able to build some IP easier off the back of it. It's a proper future gazing sort of thing because obviously you've got to get through the decision first. But have you talked about how the practicality of that would work if it happened to be CCO, and if there could be any additional benefits to being a holder? I don't mean from rights. I mean maybe
Like,
having a better set of files to work from.
yeah, you mean like an easier sandbox to build IP off of, like the base?
I mean, you're
Like,
basically just talking about all the PNGs that were used to generate the file, like the actual product itself.
Yeah,
The
kind of thing.
9,000, the 9,001 that already exist are available. You can just, well, other than the ones that are in the team wallet, but I mean, that's like we're not even at the vote yet, so let's just get through one thing at a time, in my opinion.
Well, I'm always thinking about, because I think the biggest thing that happened with this was the perception of lost value, and if you're able to, you know, circle some value as well as the decision making stuff, but also circle some value for holders, because that's the thing that we're dealing with at the moment. It's not the reality of lost value, it's the perception of lost value. I think that's probably why it was quite jarring when it
well,
was
that's,
announced.
yeah, more to the point that they just can't see what's going to be produced yet. Like the biggest, I mean, that's really what I see it comes down to. I've been in spaces with the community the whole time, and people just don't know what's being made behind the scenes. So they're naturally they want assurance in a very volatile and insecure market. It's I get it. It makes perfect sense to me. It's just the team can't give up these kinds of details yet. So there's a leap of faith that has to be done on an individual basis, and I am going to continue to make that leap of faith because I think the team is really onto something awesome.
Yeah, 100%. And as you know, mate, I'm totally with you on that. I am like, there are two options. I trust the team. The team is saying this is a good option. I've done some reading. I think it looks like a good option. You've only got to look at MFers. Would that really be where it is today if it wasn't for CCO? I severely doubt it with that one. And we have a strong product and we have a very strong team. So I can only see it being as good, And I think we are all now a lot more up on CCO than we were before. So that's a good thing as well.
That was just mentioned in the chat. What ZZ and you talking about, Mr. Yellow? Somebody put a comment in there. How do we know what we're even sort of voting for, and what's going to happen in the future? And I think people have a problem with that aspect. And I'm in the same position as you two, and many others that have discussed this throughout the weeks in spaces and things. And we have to have faith, and if everybody's has the ability to choose one way or the other, and that's why it's going to a vote. So I think it's a really good idea, and I'll have to leave. So thanks for letting me speak, and I'll jump down. Cheers.
Thanks, Critical. We always love having you in here or on Spaces. I'd like to point out something was mentioned in the chat. Hang on. Deskio said, your junkies become more desirable if they're in anime, though. And he says he has no plans of monetizing his junkies, but that right there is the thing. So if it was CCO, I mean, we have the power. We have the power to build whatever we can actually dream of. The actual limit of what we can do with our Shonen junkies is within our own imagination. So if you don't see yourself, using your junkie to make money off of it, and you're just expecting the team to make your money, then, I mean, how does that? It's not a give and take. That's just a take.
No, I think that that's an okay thing to have an expectation that the team's going to be building things. I don't think that's actually necessarily a problem with a give and take. There are certain people who get into this to actively build something. There's others who just kind of want to be along for the ride, and there's plenty enough space in the project for each of them to respectively play on their own terms.
Thank you for that. I might not have worded that correctly.
And this kind of isn't saying you can't build with your stuff. It's actually, in fact, saying you can build with the entire stuff. So in that way, if you want to build stuff, you can. You can build lots and lots of stuff. I don't even know, it might be a question for S234, that if you did build stuff under IP restrictions, what happens if you ever sold one of those? Does that stuff then have to come down and things? It's a real complex minefield of stuff. I just look at it and go, reality is, with all the JPEGs in my bag, how many have I actually monetized really? And the answer is none. So it's kind of that perception of things that you could do. And I think the network effect of having loads of builders would just be so awesome for Shonen. Just amplifying what's already happening on Twitter with people wearing it as their PFPs and tweeting lots about Shonen and stuff like that. I just think that network effect is amplified even more, and it will only bring, value to the original collection and also hopefully the brand, which then gives you even more value.
Yeah, for sure. Yo, what's up, Heavy D?
Oh, what's up? Just as from my experience in creative industries over the last sort of 15, 20 years, I think people massively overestimate other people's ability to monetize any kind of IP or content that they don't create themselves. You always think it's going to happen, and it never does. It's expensive. It's unless it just doesn't happen the way people think it's going to happen. No one's going to take your PFP and build a restaurant. No one's going to take your PFP and put it on a billboard. Like it's kind of one of those things where like it's a fear play. And I can tell you from experience that it rarely happens. And the other flip side of that is that when you do lock all your content under IP, you vastly underestimate how expensive and how long it takes to litigate if someone does break does break that IP contract or infringe on your IP rights. So yeah, I think like it's hard because obviously things have come like a long way from the mint to now. But yeah, in my opinion, CCO is definitely in the best interests of the project and the community. And yeah, it's hard, but I'm supportive of it. So I'll just sort of leave that there.
I'd like to ask if we can add a component to the voting where we require Sabrina to watch Neon Genesis Evangelion in full.
Supported.
Wait, what?
She's never seen Neon Genesis Evangelion.
S234.
I'm sorry. I keep telling everyone I haven't watched a lot of animes. I already have a list based off of the recommendations from the community members, though. So I promise I'll get on it. Ranking of Kings is next, ZZ. It's next on my list. I just finished.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Good idea.
Yeah, I just finished this anime. It's from it was adapted from a manga. It's called Katara Lives Alone. I finished the first season. No one's ever heard of it, but it was pretty good actually.
Awesome. I mean, if anyone doesn't have any questions, maybe we can start to wrap up here. It is pushing almost 2 hours since we started this. Yeah, so maybe last call for people down in the audience. Feel free to come up, request to speak. If anyone else up here on stage has any more questions that they would like to ask, now is the time. All right, cool. Um, Nabita, you wanna wrap us up?
Yeah. So I guess the things to do would be to figure out the snapshot situation. And again, we just wanted to reiterate, if there's anything that is sort of our bad, my bad, is the way in which this was communicated. So duly noted, and we'll move on and hopefully things go a little bit smoother with other sort of bigger decisions down the line. I think someone mentioned it, I think in the chat, but it's also important to note that flexibility is going to be key here in our journey. And I know everyone at least on the core team is of that same mindset. Like we're willing to have our opinions refuted, to have healthy dialogue, and to take a lot of those inputs and try to press forward. Right. I think there's very little that I can speak for the team, feel very, very strongly about. Maybe Shinji with like VS Code. I know he feels really strongly about that. But outside of that, like I think we're flexible, and I think we're hoping that the community at large as well is willing to be on that journey with us. And be flexible. Again, we'll work on the communications, but outside of that, expect to hear from us fairly shortly on the voting mechanics, and I guess we'll go from there.
Awesome. Yeah.
I've got a quick question actually. If anyone from the team fancies being on a YouTube live, I've got a chat with the MF, the person who runs the MFers space, and we're talking about CCO on Saturday. So like literally anyone, team or ZZ, who wants to come on and just maybe have a chat for 10 minutes and put that on there as to your current thinking. It'll all be friendly and that, like, it's not going to be investigative journalism, but it'd be really, really good to hear Shonen perspective and hopefully have some of that MFers perspective in there as well. To some of the learning of what what they've experienced by doing it. That would be cool.
Awesome. Yeah, let us know, and if there's folks here that can make it, I think that'd be pretty cool. And
Brilliant.
before we break, I mean, there's been a lot of requests to hear Uncle Niku speak, so I'm just gonna, maybe he can take us out.
Without a script, you just want me to just
Take us out, bro.
Can I get a let's fucking go, Uncle Niku?
let's fucking go.
Nice.
Man. All right, we'll
All
have
right.
more details out on the vote soon, maybe tomorrow. And I think that'll be good. We'll go from there. We've also got a cool merch announcement / contest that we'll be announcing tomorrow. So keep an eye out for those two things. But other than that, thank you guys for the great dialogue here, and it was great to hear both sides of kind of the fence. But other than that, that's all I got. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Peace.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.